Today's video is not what we expected to be creating this week, but after our last lore dive on the Ulcerated Tree Spirits, we received multiple comments from our community about what they'd like our next topic to be. In the early days of the channel, we like to put up polls asking our viewers what they wanted our next video to be about, and we've always made sure to pay attention to what questions you're most interested in having answered. As we've already explored so many different enemies and characters in Elden Ring, we felt like it was more important than ever that we go back to our roots and focus our attention on what you want to see. So in this episode of Elden Lore, we will be exploring the Erdtree avatars. If you watched last week's video on the Ulcerated Tree Spirits, you'll likely be familiar with some of today's story, but don't let that drive you away, because we will be going deeper and making sure to keep this video as unique as possible. With that said, let's talk about these protectors of the many minor Erdtrees found across the lands between. If this is your first time finding our videos, welcome to Elden Lore, where we explore the individual characters, monsters, and mysteries in Elden Ring. We try to focus on those topics others may not explore and love to ask our community what enemies they'd like us to dive into. If you enjoy our content, why not subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date on the latest episodes in this series. Every sub helps our community grow, and when it comes down to it, that's why this series has found any kind of success. It's because of you, our viewers. Thanks again for choosing to spend your time with us, and with that, let's get back to the topic at hand. The Erdtree avatars seem like a very straightforward enemy. They exist to protect the minor Erdtrees that sprung up after the Shattering. The only written lore we can find about them comes from their weapon, the Staff of the Avatar. This weapon is described as a ceremonial staff, depicting the Erdtree in its historic radiance, wielded by the avatars who protect the minor Erdtrees. The avatars, emerging in the wake of the Elden Ring shattering, were determined to protect the withering Erdtree's offspring. What's interesting about these weapons is that sometimes the Erdtree avatars will form in front of the tree they're protecting, weapon in hand, but when they disappear, we can take that staff for ourselves. This, alongside the way it was called a ceremonial staff, leads us to believe that the avatars did not come into being already wielding these weapons, but that these were created for them by those who believed in their mission to protect the minor Erdtrees. We have another point to discuss when it comes to these weapons, but we'll come back to it a little bit later. We know these creatures emerged after the Shattering, but what exactly these avatars are is a mystery. An avatar is described as a manifestation of a deity or released soul in bodily form on Earth. So it's fair to assume that the avatars are a literal embodiment of the spirits that reside within the minor Erdtrees. These spirits are laid to rest at the roots of an Erdtree in a rite known as Erdtree burial. In fact, we find many spirit ashes at the base of these minor Erdtree roots, some of which describe their former selves as having been granted an Erdtree burial. In our previous video about the Ulcerated Tree Spirits, we dove into the idea that these tree spirits were the literal spirits of Erdtrees that became ulcerated due to interference in their natural lifespans, either due to Godwin's corpse or scarlet rot, and that if this had not happened, they may have been able to instead take their natural route and become Erdtree avatars in order to protect their minor Erdtrees. We still believe this is one likely explanation as to the origins of the Erdtree avatars. They are the literal spirit of a minor Erdtree that normally resides within, much like how the Elden Beast resides within the main Erdtree. However, while reading more about the idea of avatars for this script, we've developed another interpretation we think is worth considering. What if the Erdtree avatars are distinctly different from the Ulcerated Tree Spirits, in that they're not the literal spirit of the minor Erdtree, but rather an amalgamation of spirits, given an Erdtree burial, that typically would have been used to feed the cycle of death and rebirth within the Erdtree, but are now instead being pulled away to act as a defensive wall in a desperate attempt to allow a new Erdtree to grow. Their more human-like design and use of a weapon would make more sense if we consider the idea that the avatars themselves were made out of the souls of humanoid creatures buried in the roots of their tree. Their bark-like appearance that can even be seen as a form of robe, their ceremonial weapons, clear arms and legs giving them a more humanoid appearance, all make much more sense when considering their origins in this light. So with this said, we have two different ideas of what the Erdtree avatars truly are, and sadly, without any additional lore, we can't say for sure which is correct, but we'd love to hear your thoughts and reasoning. The next topic related to the Erdtree avatars we thought was worth discussing was the putrid avatars, those that have been corrupted by the Scarlet Rot. These enemies are only found in places either heavily affected by the spread of the Scarlet Rot or that were frequented by Malenia, such as Caelid, the Mountaintop of Giants, and Elphael, Brace of the Erdtree. These avatars should have a simple explanation. They're nothing more than Erdtree avatars that have been afflicted by Scarlet Rot, touched by the outer god of Rot, and warped due to its influence. The most interesting thing about them, in our opinion, is their weapon, the Rotten Staff. The description of the Rotten Staff is much like the other rotted weapons. It doesn't really tell you anything new. Ceremonial staff depicting the Erdtree in its historic radiance, it festers with Scarlet Rot, wielded by the avatars who protect the minor Erdtrees. Here though, we find an interesting inconsistency. These staffs are not simply rotted, broken versions of the staffs wielded by the Erdtree avatars. Even though they're said to depict the Erdtree in its historic radiance, they look completely different from the regular staff of the avatar, taking on a wildly different shape and unique ornamentation. Perhaps these weapons were simply warped by the Rot and changed due to the influence of the god of Rot, their depictions bastardized to better reflect what that god's tree may look like. It's hard to say why they look so wildly different, but one thing is for certain. This is not the same weapon. While the majority of avatars we face, both fresh and putrid, are found at the base of a minor Erdtree, there are a few outliers. There's one Erdtree avatar we face in Lanedale, the royal capital, but this is easily explained as the avatar of the main Erdtree, able to walk the city as its roots stretch far below its walls. The other avatars found without a tree of their own are putrid, and found within Elphael. Both of these enemies exist due to properties of the Erdtree itself. Miquella's tree was always meant to act as a replacement for the Erdtree, and after Mohg absconded with Miquella's cocoon, the tree has been dying, succumbing to the rot deep within due to Malenia. If we assume that champions of the Erdtree were also given burial at its roots, this creates the possibility of the tree creating its own avatars, and its sheer size would necessitate more than one to defend it. Of course, these avatars would be putrid, because without Miquella to mitigate its influence far below the tree's roots, they would be tainted by the Scarlet Rot. If you believe the Erdtree avatars are created using the very spirits that were supposed to feed the Erdtree and be part of its cycle of death and rebirth, then it makes these enemies another twisted example of life within the lands between. The souls or essence of those buried at the roots of the Erdtree, people that were promised they would become part of its cycle, were instead used in a horrible amalgamation of tree and human to defend the trees themselves. Perhaps when we defeat these enemies, we're doing these souls a kindness by releasing them from the horror of being fused together to create these avatars. And in that way, we're bringing the souls of the dead in the lands between some level of peace. We can only hope that once we take the throne, these avatars will no longer be necessary, and the dead will no longer be warped and fused to serve as a defensive bulwark between the minor Erdtrees and those that would do them harm. What do you think about our theories on the origins of the Erdtree avatars? Do you believe that they are the spirits of the trees given physical form to protect themselves? Or are they the souls of those buried at its roots, repurposed into defenders of the minor Erdtrees? Why do the staff of the Avatar and the Rotten Staff look so wildly different? What is the goal of the putrid avatars if their trees are already succumbing to the Scarlet Rot? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss out on our lore dives and speculation. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden Lore.